Welcome back to Romania's beautiful and fabled region of Transylvania. I'm here in the city of Brasov, surrounded by the southern Carpathian Mountains and one of the country's loveliest and most popular places for foreign visitors. We're pretty much in the center of Romania here, with the capital Bucharest about 100 miles to the south, the Black Sea about 200 miles to the east, and the Ukraine border about 200 miles to the north. This fascinating place is another Transylvanian city that owes its early existence to German settlers encouraged to come to the region to build towns, open mines, and engage in agriculture 8 centuries ago, the so-called Transylvanian Saxons. And while most of them fled Romania during the long communist period that followed World War II, Brasov, like Sibiu in my previous video, is remarkable testament to their imprint on Romanian society. Historically, Brasov was the center of what the Saxons referred to as Burzenland, an important crossroads for trade between Old Austria under the Habsburg kings and Turkey during the Ottoman Empire. And beyond the Germanic influence, there was a strong Hungarian and Jewish presence here, in addition, of course, to traditional Romanians. Despite the disruptions of 2 world wars and a grim 4 decades under the old communist regime, for a time in the 1950s, the city was even renamed Stalin City, which didn't stick. Brasov has not only survived, but thrived. And thankfully, much of its medieval splendor is remarkably intact. Even the small alleyways are filled with outdoor cafes and people just sitting around and relaxing. You have to remember that this city was once within a fortress, completely surrounded by walls. And so from one little plaza to another plaza often means going through an alley. You feel as though you're in a fort. The tunnel I'm walking through now is leading into the main square. I'm here in Council Square, the heart of the old city and the center of the wheel, so to speak, from which medieval Brasov radiates outwardly. It began as a market square in 1364, drawing patrons from near and far, and it continues to be Old Brasov's most lively gathering place. The grand building that you see behind me is known as the Council House, built in 1420. It's another way of saying it's the mayor's office, or at least it was. Today, it's a local history museum. Most of the beautiful buildings you see sprawled around this square are actually from the 17 and 1800s. That's because a major fire decimated many of the buildings around here in the year 1689. In the background, you can probably see people sunning themselves in front of a beautiful fountain beside the council house. Well, back in the day, that's the approximate location of a pillory where ne'er-do-wells, petty thieves, and accused witches were held up for public ridicule. Just a short distance from Council Square is Brasov's most imposing as well as iconic structure. That is the so-called Black Church. This was originally a Catholic church when German settlers, the Transylvanian Saxons, built it starting in the late 1300s, although it was well into the next century before it was finished. It became Lutheran after the Protestant Reformation. So you may be wondering, why is it called the Black Church? Well, the lore, which is still passed along as truth in some quarters among tourist promoters, is that it was from the soot that stained the building following the great 1689 fire. As it turns out, the soot was not from a fire 3.5 centuries ago, but from industrial pollution. Brasov has been an industrial city since the 1800s and continues to be so to this day. The term Black Church didn't even begin to be used until the end of the 19th century. Well, it may just be the mood that I'm in, but this is one of the prettiest fruit stands, shops that I can recall seeing anywhere. Not only is it arranged so well, but just the quality in this shop looks to be off the charts. You know how you can go into a place and maybe into a grocery store and the bananas are a little off color or mushy. Everything in here looks pristine. It almost looks like a movie set. It's so lovely. Well, no trip to Brasov would be complete without ascending Tampa Mountain for the best views in town. To do that, I'm headed to the funicular. I often get amused by what I read in some blogs and even guidebooks. I mentioned that because last night I was reading about Tampa Mountain, and the writer was saying that to get there is easy. You can either walk up or take the chairlift. Well, the hilltop is about 1,300 feet or 400 meters above the city, so that's sort of like saying getting to the top of the Empire State Building is easy. You can either take the stairs or take an elevator. I think some of these people should actually visit the places they're writing about. This beautiful promenade I'm walking on at the quote-unquote foot of the mountain is not really at the foot of the mountain. You have to come up from the city streets to get here. I guess I walked up at just the right time because quite a crowd has gathered behind me. It's 20 persons per cabin on this cable car, and it goes up this hill pretty fast. I got my ticket for the round trip and just waiting for the Coca-Cola car to arrive. As you'll see in a second, the cable cars are advertised on 4 sides by the soft drink company. And here we go. I got my 2 minutes, 20 seconds worth. I'm at the point on the mountain where the famous Brasov sign stares out over much of the city. You think immediately of the Hollywood sign in Los Angeles, which is chock with all sorts of symbolism, but literally what is it? It's just a lettered sign that says Hollywood, but it's become an identifiable element of the city. And it's the same here. In fact, in Romania, they promote the city, Brasov, as the Hollywood of Romania. It's above my pay grade to understand these things. This mountain, Tampa Mountain, is in the middle of the city. It is surrounded on 4 sides by either the city or its suburbs. And there's something else about this place that's pretty amazing given that juxtaposition of the mountain. And that is that there are black bears who inhabit this mountain. It's very rare to see one, but nonetheless they're here. Occasionally a tourist will have an encounter with one. There are about 24 hiking trails that fan up into this mountain. In fact, if you want to buy a one-way ticket up on the cable car, you can hike down any number of ways. This is Transylvania, remember, and when the Romans conquered it in 105 CE, there was a civilization here, the Dacian civilization, and archaeologists have uncovered evidence of worship sites on this mountain, although there's no direction as to how to get to these sites, probably because little has been done to excavate or develop them. One of the strangest things up here can't be seen during this time of year. During the communist era, when Brasov for a time, well, during the 1950s, was referred to as Stalin's City, the pro-Soviet government had a group of fir trees planted on the side of this mountain to spell out the word Stalin. Not a very popular place for promotion these days, but even if it were, the other trees, deciduous trees and vegetation have rendered it almost invisible during the spring and summer, so the only time to see Stalin is in the fall and winter, when the leaves disappear from the trees here. The beautiful neighborhood I've just entered is Schei, just a short stroll from the Black Church and Council Square. It's a village-like section of town with small homes, or at least originally small homes. They're not so small anymore, with pretty gardens that line narrow streets on the slopes of Tampa Mountain. This neighborhood was originally composed of Bulgarians and Romanians who settled here in the late 1300s for a specific purpose, as laborers brought in to construct the Black Church as the city church at the time, starting in 1385. The new town of Brasov, then called Kronstadt, was a German city, remember, and it was behind the fortress walls. Outsiders, which is to say non-Saxons, weren't allowed to live within those walls. Hence, this community grew up just outside the gates. Of course, that changed eventually. For one thing, most of the Bulgarians who settled here assimilated as Romanians. So by the time of the 1990 census, there wasn't a single family here that claimed to be Bulgarian. There's only one fortress gate that still stands from medieval times here in Brasov. It's the one leading into the Schei neighborhood, and it's called Catherine's Gate, for an old monastery that once stood here. Today, the gate, despite its historical significance, is rather hidden in obscurity. I'm walking through a small park on a cobble walkway that leads to the gate. There are no cars that can gain access here. And I'm about to walk through it with practically no one around except for maybe a couple of people sitting behind me on a park bench. You almost have to hunt for it to find it. Just walking these lovely streets, you can't help but sense irony. The Saxons are mostly gone. Much of the old fortress wall is gone. And you'd never guess that for several centuries, the people who lived here, despite building the city's most precious monument, needed permission just to enter the town. And a final irony. Today, Schei is one of Brasov's most upscale neighborhoods. As is inevitable with any place such as Brasov, with such a long, rich, and colorful history, there are many scars here, inflicted from different sources. I'm walking along a pathway in a cemetery, and except for one older gentleman sitting stoically at one end of it on a bench, I'm the only one here. Interestingly, all of the gravestones in this cemetery are from World War I, because this is a cemetery for Transylvanian Saxons, for the Germans of this community at that time who died in that war. It's a rather ironic reminder that not only Germans fled Romania after World War II, but of course, so did many Jews. There were 135,000 Romanian Jews who died in the Holocaust. Many of them left Romania and resettled in Israel, the United States, and other locations. I'm here on Rope Street. Believe it or not, this is a street. It is not just an alleyway as it appears. A street for pedestrians only, of course. And it's been around for centuries. And as you would expect, as one of Europe's most narrow streets, it's long been a tourist attraction. In case you're wondering, the width of this passage varies between 111 and 135 centimeters, or that's about 44 to 55 inches. It's only 80 meters long. That's about 260 feet. Apparently, graffiti is not discouraged here. I've not seen anything or read anything to suggest why this street is called, in English, Rope Street. But at one end there is a statue of a woman completely bound in a rope and seeming to point the way onto the street. Not a lot of room for extra wide people in this street. In fact, it's not a good place for two people to be walking together holding hands either.